So we got up to the Mishnah on Daf Chav Gimel Amid Beis, on the bottom of the Amud. Hakore b'Torah lo yivchos mishlosha psukim. So the minimum amount for a karu, for someone who's called up, is to read 3 psukim. V'lo yikra lameturgman yotzem mipasuk echad. When he reads, he should read one pasuk and then take a pause, so that the meturgman, the translator, could now translate it into the vernacular. In the case of the Gemara, it was into Aramaic. Now we start the daf for today, and that's Chav Daled Amud Aleph. Ubin Navi, we can be more lenient with regard to the Navi, and that is when we're up to the Torah, Losha. All we have to require is that the reader of the Haftorah should take a pause after 3 psukim, and then give the opportunity to the Metargim to translate those 3 psukim. So you could have a chunk, a unit of 3 psukim. The reason for that is because when it comes to Torah, we have to be very careful that the translation and the way we transmit the Torah to others is accurate. Otherwise, people could walk away with the wrong impressions. There are a lot of mitzvos and halachas that we derive from the Torah. But in the case of Nevi'im, they're giving us prophecy, which is not Torah. It doesn't have the status of halacha. And therefore, in the worst case scenario, if the Metargim gets a little bit confused because it's got a burden of 3 psukim, it's not a great loss. We don't have to worry so much and be concerned. Now, with regard to reading from the Navi, we have the following limitations. If, let's say, these 3 psukim that he wants to read come from 3 different parashas, then in that case, korim echad echad. Then, when he gets to the Meturgamon, and he has to take a pause in order to allow the Meturgamon to translate, then he should translate psukim from each parasha separately, meaning if he reads a pasuk from one parasha, then he's got to take a break, allowing the Meturgim to translate that pasuk before he moves on to a pasuk from a different parasha, even though it's less than 3 psukim. The Mishnah says, "Medalgim ben Navi, the ein medalgim ben Torah." As far as Navi is concerned, we have no problem in jumping from one parasha to another parasha, and we'll see soon that you can allow dilug even from one Navi to another Navi. There is only one stipulation that has to be fulfilled, and that is that he's able to roll the script that he's reading from one place to another, and within that time period, the Metargim could be Metargim. We don't want to cause what's called Pirkei Tzibura, which means that by moving from one Navi to another, it's going to take such a long time that even though the Metargim is finished with his Tirgum, and now we have a period of absolute silence, a waste of time, and the people are fidgety. They're doing nothing. So if during that pause, getting from one Navi to another Navi, until he moves around the scroll, what we say, he rolls it from one section, one parsha to the other. During that period of time, the people are preoccupied listening to the Meturgamon, and he'll very quickly be able to roll the scroll and get to the second parsha that he wants to read now. That's fine. But if the process of rolling the scroll will take longer than it would take the Meturgamon to be Metargim, that's already a pogea. That's pogea and kavod tzibur, and it's a tircha tzibur. Ein medalgim b'Torah. Well, with regard to reading from the Torah, it's very confusing if you go from one parsha and you skip the next parsha over to a different parsha. You have to go to Seder. The Adkamu Medalig, and as we said before, when it comes to dilug in Nevi'im, which was permissible, but how much time will it take you to roll the scroll? Then Ad Kadesh Lo Yifsak HaMeturgim. There should be a hefsek, an interruption of time, after which the Meturgamon has already completed his process of translation, and we're waiting for the continuation of the reading because he's still in the process of rolling to another parasha in Navi. The Gemara says, Hani Gimel Psukim Keneged Mi. The Mishnah has already established that the minimum amount of psukim to be read in the Torah by one particular Koreh is 3. What does that correspond to? What's the significance? Number 3, Omer Rav Asi, Keneged Torah Neviim Uksumim. The Mishnah says, Lo Yikra La Meturgaman Yosem Pasuk Echad, one pasuk at a time for the Meturgaman. So you take a little break after you read one pasuk to give the translator a chance, an opportunity to be metargim. V'navi 3 psuk, gimel psuk. Im hoyu shloshtam shalosh parshas korei echad echad. Now Mishnah establishes that if these 3 psukim are in 3 different parshios, then the korei has to take a break from one parsha till he begins the kriya of the next parsha to allow the metargim to be metargim. And that's because if it's a different parshios, then conceptually it's a different theme and a different motif, and therefore we don't want to deliberately confuse the people by doing a tirgum of 3 psukim from 3 different parshios that are not connected in any sort of conceptual way. That's going to confuse them. When you join together many different themes in one tirgum. Keep going. In fact, the Gemara now actually gives an example of different psukim that have different subjects. And by the way, the Ritva says that if they have 3 different subjects, then you're required to allow them in Targum as one, even if the 3 psukim are in the same navi, even if you don't have to do any deal. Kugon, for example, and here we're going to read a few psukim from Yeshaya. This is Perek Nun Beis. And that's one concept. You have been sold for naught. Second concept continues in the next pasuk. My people went down initially to Mitzrayim. Whole new topic. Now, what I have here, the next pasuk, that's already again a new subject. And if it's a new subject, then you have to be mafsik between one subject and the other in order to allow the Targum to translate and the people to understand what's going on. Is this really so? Raminu, we have a stira from a Mishnah in Masechet Yoma. The Mishnah says, we're talking about the Kohen Gadol, who after he finishes the avodah, the Shnei Aseirim, and he sends the Soyer Lazazel on its way, now he goes into the Ezras Nashim and he reads the Torah in front of those who are there as a public reading of the Torah. He reads from Parshas Achrimos and also Parshas Ach Be'asor. So the Gemara asks, wait a minute, he's going from one parsha to the other. And the Mishnah says explicitly, when it comes to Kriyas HaTorah from the 5 books of Moses, you're not allowed to do diluk from one parsha to another. Omar Abaye lo kasher kan b'chteishi yifsak haTurguman v'kan k'deish lo yifsak haTurguman. Somehow, mistakenly, Abaye took the distinction that our Mishnah made with regard to Navi, and he applied it to Torah. The Gemara is going to object, but let's give Abaye right now the license to do so. So whatever distinction we saw at the end of our Mishnah with regard to Navi, we're going to apply it to Torah as well. So when you're reading Psukim of the Torah from different parshios, as long as you can roll the Sefer Torah fast forward to the second parsha, and the Meturgim will still be busy translating and transmitting the Turgum, that's okay. But if on the other hand there's going to be, as we called it, empty space, then that's already Tircha de Tzibura. So the Gemara immediately objects for her, all alok tani, medalgim b'novi ve'ein medalgim b'torah, v'adkama medalgim ad kidei shel yifsak haTurgum. The Mishnah makes this distinction, allowing you to jump from one parsha to another and roll the scroll. That's only as far as Navi is concerned. It says medalgim b'novi. So there is only a het of diluk b'novi, and the Mishnah restricted that heter of diluk b'navi that it only applies when he can do a very quick rolling of the scroll. And if you can't, even in Navi, you're not allowed to do deal. But the Mishnah never allowed any deal whatsoever with regard to Torah. B'chlal the Torah, klal lo. The entire entity of deal does not apply. There's no heter for it in Kriyas HaTorah. So how is it that the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippurim is reading from Achrimos and then skipping to the Parsha of Achbes Olech Chodesh? Elomar Abaye now has to, retract his original reconciliation and supply a different one, an alternative. Elomar Abaye, lo kasha kan binyan echad, v'kan b'shtei inyanos. When the Mishnah in Masechet Yoma allows dilug, that's because both parshios are related to each other, right? We have the Kiddush Sayom, which expresses itself in Parshas Achrimos with the Avoda of the Kohen Gadol, and then you have the general Kiddush Sayom of all Moadim in Achbes Olech Chodesh, and that is again a reflection and a study of the Kiddush Sayom. That's called the Inyan Echad, and therefore we're allowing dilug the Inyan Echad. And now Abai is defending his position that there is such an entity and a leniency, recognizing the license to do dilug, but only if it's Inyan Echad. Kan b'shtei inyanos. But when the Mishnah says dilug is out of the question, that's talking about a case of two different topics. And that's going to confuse the kahal of listeners. But when you're staying within the same inyan, for example, if you're going from the Kohen Gadol of Avoda to the Kohen Gadol of Kiddush Sayom, that's fine. And the Gemara now is going to actually quote a brisa that supports Abaye. Tanya, we learned in the brisa, medalgim b'Torah b'inyan echad. Finally, we see it explicitly, and this is obviously before Abaye, in the time of the Tanoim, they already ruled that there is such an entity and a license for dilug in Torah itself, but as long as it's only binyan echad. So what's the special kula that we said we could be more lenient in Navi, as we said at the outset, because we're less concerned and worried about the possibility of misunderstanding when it comes to Navi? Navi b'shnei inyanos. In the case of Navi, we're going to allow you to do a dilug even from one topic to another topic. However, we still have a restrictive stipulation. The condition is kan v'kan in both cases, whether it's inyan echad in chumash or it's in shnei inyanim in nach. It's p'chtei shel yifsak haturgavan. We still have to be sensitive to the tirchad tzibur. Tanya idach. And now we have another brisa, which adds another limitation rule. Ein medalgim b'navi l'navi. You want to go from one book of Navi to another. U'b'navi shel shnei masar medalig b'vat shel yidalig misofa sefer chilos. What is considered one Navi? In the case of Trei Asar, which is called Shnei Masar here in the brisa, we have 12 different prophets. And we'll read the list of them just to keep it in mind. Hosea, Yoel, Amos, Ovadia, Yonah, Micha, Nachum, Chavakuk, Tzfanya, Chagai, Zechariah, Malach. And these are all very short books of Nevi'im. And what we're allowed to do, according to this brisa, is we could do a dilug from one Navi to another. And the impression you get is that you could do such a dilug even if you're going from one inyan to another. And there's a stipulation in Shal Yidali Misofa Seifert L'Tchilasa. What we're not allowed to do is to go from the end of one book back to the beginning of the same book. That's what it says over here. Let me just double check the translation here. Shelo yikra keta misof sefer v'achar kach yidaleg la'achar He's going backwards. V'yikra keta lefana. So again, you can move forward, but you can't move backwards. So the Bryce is saying that ein medal could be navi l'nav. You're not allowed to jump, let's say, from Yoshua to Shoftu, because that's going to confuse the audience. But b'navi, in the case of Treyasar, Shel Shnei Masar, where all these small Sfarim are sort of integrated into one large sefer, they're metallic. You're allowed to be metallic even from one navi to the other. It's all considered like one sefer. And that leads us to the Mishnah here in the middle of Daf Chav Daled Amud Aleph. Hamaftir b'navi. Now what we're saying is that a person who reads Navi, here we have two interpretations in the commentaries. According to one interpretation, it means a common reader, meaning we usually call on this person almost consistently to read the Navi. Or alternatively, others interpret that we're talking about this particular case where Ploni Almoni has been given the honor of reading the Maftir. Now, you might think that reading Naftorah is a great kibbut, and let's pay top dollar to get that kibbut. It's not so. In fact, the Haftorah is considered a lower level of a kibbut than participating in the actual reading of the Torah. And as we said before, Navi is not on the same level as Chamisha Chumshei Torah. In fact, a Katan will very often, I mean, you don't see it that often amongst Ashkenazim, but will very often read the Haftorah, which he's allowed to do. And it's not on the same level of Torah. A Katan, for example, in Torah, our minig, the Mishnah Berurah codifies that, does not allow a Katan before Bar Mitzvah to read the Torah. But Navi, we allow. So we have to compensate. We have to compensate this person who got stuck or volunteered to do this work of reading the Maftir. So what are we going to give him as a chupar, as we say in Arabic? What gift do we want to give him? So the answer is, number one, who pores al Shema. If we have a case of being pores al Shema, which is subject to the Mishnah Benach Daf Chav Gimel, which means that, let's say, for example, you have 10 people who didn't hear Kaddish, Kedusha, Baruch Hu, and so forth. So we'll organize a Baruch Hu that follows with the first bracha of Kriyat Shema, of Yotzer Ma'oros, and then we'll have Kedusha, and so forth. We'll organize all this as a Paris Shema, but here we're going to appoint as the shliach of the tzibur, the person who read the maftir. Not only that, who over lifnei hatev. When we get to Chazar Hashatz, he's going to be over lifnei hatev. Now, this is a real problem in interpreting this mission. If you assume that maftir b'novi means on this particular occasion, he's the reader of the Haftorah, because how do we know who's going to get that kibbut, so to speak, of reading the Haftorah? You're up to Kriyat Shema, you're up to Chazar Sashat, you haven't even gotten to Kriyat Torah yet. And therefore, they bring a proof that more likely Hamaftir b'Navi is referring to someone who is the upstanding person who always reads from the Navi. And again, we want to compensate him by telling him that he's going to be the Shliach Tzibur and he's going to recite Chazar Sashatz. Now, if he's a Kohen who knows his kappa, he's going to get the special kibbut of Nesias Kapayim. Now, here again, the Mefarshim have a problem with this because all the Kohanim get Nesias Kapayim. So, what are you singling? What special kavod are you giving to this Kohen that goes above and beyond the other Kohen? So it could be that we're talking about the bracha before Birchas Kohen. And their minhag was that only one Kohen would be mevarach that bracha. He says the following. Harikola Kohanim Notzim is Kapeya. He says, Hamafter b'novi maschil levorech lifnei shar hakohanim. I don't know what that means. I mean, he quotes the name of the Tosfos Yontif, like as if all these Kohanim will give their brachas not simultaneously, but one after the other in sequence. So who's going to be the first one to give his bracha? Very strange. Now he quotes the Turi Even that we're talking about a Beis HaKnesses Shekulam Kohen. Right, so we have 10 Kohanim in the audience, and that's the entire Kohen. Is the Didu Shemiktsasam Mevarchim Miktsasam Onim Ome. Ba'alomar Shamafte Yiyah Min HaMevarch. The Turi Even says that amongst the division of 5 and 5, you have to guarantee that the maftir will be in the 5 that are no seis kapeh. Im hayakatan. Let's say that the Kohen is a katan, and let's say we want to give maftir to a katan, and now we want to give an honor to the katan, but the katan is not a bar chiyuva. He cannot be the one to be paris al shma. He cannot be the one to be over l'fnei teva. Okay, we'll see as far as Birchas Kohanim is concerned. If there are no other Kohanim, he will not be Noseis Kappa. It's only when there are other Kohanim we'll allow the Kohanim. So what do we do with this kibud that we cannot offer to the one who's reading the Haftarah because he's a Katan? Aviv o Rabo Ovrim al Yada. He will be replaced or represented by the father. And it's either Aviv, and if there's no Aviv, then it'll be Rabo in that sequence. And the Gemara is going to analyze why the Aviv or Rabo get to pick up that kibud. Katan Kori B'Torah Mitargem. Again, according to the strict law of the Mishnah, as I said before, the Mishnah says how minig is not like that. A Kohen can actually read the Torah. And our minig is that Mitargem, he would be allowed to be Mitargem, and for sure he would be allowed to read the Maftir. Because he has to be a bar chiyuva, and will apply the principle of Yatza Motzi or Kol Yisrael Ravens, but he's not a bar chiyuva, and he cannot be the shots to be Motzi the Tzibur Yidei Chovasa. The Ein Osias Kappa, he's the only Kohen, he's not going to be Mavarich the Am. Now, from this point in the mission on, we're going to deal with what's called Davar Shebe'erva, which means that the Torah prohibits reciting holy words like tefillah or Torah in the presence of nakedness. And Rashi quotes the pasuk, Lo yeh b'cha ervas davar. So what's this talking about? First, we have the case of a pocheach. Now, there's a machlokas exactly what pocheach means, but we'll assume, like Rashi for the time being, that a pocheach has his legs are exposed. Others say it's his chest that's exposed. So you have a person who's not totally dressed. And we have issues here about Kavod Tzibur. So Poris Eshmal Mitargem, right? If we're doing Poris Shma, and the assumption here that Poris Shma means that you have an obligation to read Birchas Kriyat Shma, and you want to now serve as the shots to be Motzi the Tzibur Yidei Chovasam and Birchas Kriyat Shma. And that's not considered Tefillah B'Tzibur. Again, even though, again, we require a minyan for that, but it's not on the same level as reading the Torah. Now, I don't know exactly the Lomdish Sprache. Now, what's the difference between Kriyat Shema on behalf of the Torah Tzibur and Birchas Kriyat Shema as opposed to Kriyas HaTorah? I mean, it might depend on another machlokas. When are we paris al Shema? Does it mean that these are 10 people who did not hear Baruch Hu, Kedusha, Kaddish, etc.? Or is it for one person who did not hear Kaddish and Kedusha? Let's assume it's 10 people who need to be paris al Shema. Why is that different than Kriyas HaTorah? I think that Sibur, with regard to Kriyas HaTorah, elevates the Torah to a level of Davar Shebekidusha. And once the Tzibur is involved in a Davar Shebekidusha, yeah, but we said that Paris al Shema is also Davar Shebekidusha. Right? That was the Mishnah of Gimel and Beis. So I don't know. This needs a lot of work in Be'ir to figure out the difference between Paris al Shema, where there's not a violation covered at Sibur if he's Peach, as opposed to Kriyas HaTorah. As far as Metargim is concerned, that's a whole different story. Metargim is not a Davar Shebekidusha. Metargim is really just a Limud HaTorah. It's to understand the Torah. And as long as he's not exposing his erva, and you're only involved with a Pagia, a Pagam, and Kavanat Tzibur, so we don't have that with regard to Metargim. But he can't read the Torah on behalf of the entire Kal. Nor can he recite Chazar Sashatz. He cannot be the sole Kohen to be Mavarach the Am. And all this is because it's Pogea and Kavanat Tzibur. We'll see later on that even a woman reading the Torah for the Tzibur, although technically she's allowed to, but we don't allow it because of Kavanat Tzibur. So there are many halachas of Kavanat Tzibur. As we saw before, there shouldn't be an empty space and time. Now the Mishnah says, Pores Suma, Pores Eshma Umetargem, which means that at least at one point in his life, he was capable of sight. He wasn't born blind, because if he was born blind, then he cannot be Paris al Shema, because he cannot recite Baruch Yotza Ma'oros, which is the essence of Paris Shema. We allow Baruch Hu because it connects with that first Baruch of Kriyat Shema that ends with Baruch Atah Hashem Yotza Ma'oros. So Paris says Hashma in the case of a Suma means that he wasn't born a Suma, he became a Suma. So he knows what the Ma'oros are all about. He's seen light in his time. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Kol Shelo Ra Ma'oros Miyamav Eino Paris al Shema. And that's what we said before, that he cannot recite Yotza Ma'oros if he never had sight. He was born blind. The Gemara says, "My taima." Why is it that the mafter is granted all these privileges? And here we have machlokas between Rav Papa and Rav. Rav Papa Amar Mishum Kavod, as we have to compensate him for his volunteering to take this low-edged kibud of reading the Torah, which, as we said before, even a koshik, even a cotton could do it. And Rabbi Bar Shimi Amar Mishum Di Osi Lidsuye. There's going to be contention here if we don't establish that the Koreas HaMaftir will get these kibbud. It seems that there was a monetary issue over here because a chazan, a shatz, in those days was paid for his services. And now this fellow that we call up for the maftir, he would like to vie for that opportunity to get paid as a shatz, as a leader of the tefillah. And then there's going to be a whole altercation here because the Shatz Kavua is going to say, well, I want to get that salary. I'm always the Shatz. Why do you have a right to take it away from me? And the answer is that the Mishnah already established that the Koreas HaMaftir, he's the one who will be the Shatz. My by night, what's the difference between Rav Shimi, between Rav Papa and Rabba? Let's say we're not paying the shots at all. So if you're going with Rav Papa, we still have to give a person a kibud for volunteering to read Daf Torah. If you're going with Rabba, we don't have to worry about altercations and Nitsuye, because who's going to fight over the position of being a shot since it's not a paid position? Now we learned to that Mishnah. So the father or the Rebbe will take the place of the Katan, and they will receive all those special privileges because the Katan cannot accept them. If you're going to tell me that the reason why we granted these privileges to the Baal Maftir is in order to avoid altercations and quarrels between him and the Shatz, is Katan Bar Nitzuyehu? Or is raising a kasha here on Rabbah, why should this Mishnah apply in case of a Katan? Then the Katan's not going to, fight to be the Shliach Tzibur or anything of that sort, So the Gemara turns around. Rabbah says, "Wait a minute, and it's good according to you, Rav Papa. Mishum kibud el mishum kibud katan bar kibudu. Do we have to grant all these special kibudim to a katan? We don't have to be mechabi the katan. He's not mature enough to have this desire for kavod. Elaika kavod aviv ukvod Rabbah. You're going to have to answer that the kavod of the child who's reading the maftir is identified with the kavod of his father or his rebbe. So the Gemara says, well, if Rav Papa, you're going to have to admit that there's kavod here because of the aviv or Rabbah, then, and here we turn to Daf Chav Daled Amud Beis, Hachanami Ikil Nitzuye Aviv Nitzuye Rabbo.